Welcome everyone to Macklin Sleeps. Tonight we will be hearing the story of Peregrin Took, better known as Pippin from the Lord of the Rings. We will be focusing on his life and his journey through the Lord of the Rings series, and I hope that we can learn something together about his great courage and growth through the series. Now please, comment down below what you would like to hear from the Lord of the Rings in the future, and I will do my best to create a video promptly. Now, listen to the sound of the rain and fall asleep as we take you to the quietest corner of Middle-earth, the Shire. Tonight we will spend some time getting to know Peregrin Took, better known simply as Pippin. While he may not be the first name that comes to mind when people think of the great heroes of the War of the Ring, his story is one of unexpected courage, steady growth, and the remarkable ways that even the smallest people can influence the course of history. When our story begins, Pippin is a young hobbit of the Shire, a peaceful land of rolling green hills, well-kept gardens, and comfortable homes built into the earth. Hobbits value simple pleasures above nearly everything else. They enjoy good food, warm fires, cheerful company, and quiet evenings more than adventure or glory. It is a place where excitement is unusual, and distant lands are spoken of more as curiosities than destinations. Pippin was born Peregrin Took, and a member of one of the oldest and most respected hobbit families. The Took family had long been known for producing hobbits with an unusual streak of curiosity and courage. While most hobbits were perfectly content to remain close to home throughout their lives, the Tooks occasionally displayed an interest in the wider world. Old family stories even claimed that some of Pippin's ancestors had gone on adventures with the wizard Gandalf, though many sensible hobbits preferred to treat those tales as exaggerated legends. Even among the Tooks, however, Pippin stood out for his youthful enthusiasm. At the beginning of our story, he's only 28 years old. For a hobbit, this is still considered quite young, as hobbits traditionally come of age at 33. In many ways, Pippin is still finding his place in the world. He is cheerful, curious, quick to laugh, and sometimes quicker to act than to think. He enjoys jokes, good meals, and spending time with his closest friends. Serious responsibilities have not yet become a large part of his life. Among those friends is Frodo Baggins, Pippin's older cousin, and the hobbit whose quiet life will soon change forever. Also close to Pippin are Merry Brandybuck and Samwise Gamgee. Together, these four hobbits share a friendship built upon years of familiar walks, shared meals, celebrations, and the comfortable rhythms of life in the Shire. At the beginning of their tale, none of them can truly imagine how far they will travel or how greatly they will change. If someone had met Pippin before he left the Shire, they would probably not have guessed that he would one day stand on the courts of kings, march beside great armies, or witness some of the most important events of the Third Age. He appears, at first, to be an ordinary young hobbit with an easy smile and a restless spirit. Yet this ordinary beginning is one of the central ideas woven in throughout the history of Middle-earth. Great deeds are not always performed by those who seem destined for greatness. Sometimes they begin with someone who simply chooses to remain loyal to their friends, even when the road ahead leads into darkness. As we continue our journey through Pippin's life, we will see how this cheerful young hobbit gradually becomes a figure worthy of respect, not because he was a fearless warrior from the beginning, but because he learned step by step to face fears he had never imagined, while never entirely losing the warmth, kindness, and sense of wonder who made him who he is. When Peregrin Took first appears in the Fellowship of the Ring, he is among the youngest members of the company that will eventually set out from Rivendell. At just 28 years old, he has not yet reached the age of adulthood for a hobbit, which traditionally comes at 33. Compared to the others around him, Pippin possesses little experience beyond the borders of the Shire. He has never fought in battle, traveled through distant kingdoms, or faced the kinds of hardships that define the lives of rangers, elves, dwarves, or wizards. Instead, he begins the journey as an ordinary hobbit, whose greatest strengths are his loyalty, optimism, and unwavering friendship. Although Frodo is the ring bearer, Pippin chooses to leave behind the safety of the Shire to accompany his cousin. Alongside Merry Brandybuck and Samwise Gamgee, he helps ensure that Frodo is not forced to face the growing darkness alone. This decision reflects one of Pippin's defining qualities from the very beginning. He does not fully understand the dangers ahead, yet he is willing to face them for the sake of those who he cares about. As the journey continues toward Rivendell, Pippin experiences a world that had previously existed only in stories. Ancient forests, forgotten ruins, towering mountains, and the hidden realms of elves and dwarves reveal a Middle-earth far older and larger than the peaceful countryside where he was raised. Unlike some of his companions, who view these places with familiarity or a deep historical knowledge, Pippin often reacts with curiosity and wonder. His perspective reminds readers that even the most legendary locations were once entirely unknown to an ordinary traveler. Following the Council of Elrond, Pippin is selected as one of the 9 walkers who will accompany the Fellowship. Elrond himself expresses some hesitation because of Pippin's youth, but Gandalf insists that his loyalty to Frodo is more valuable than greater strength or experience. This decision proves to be an important reminder that the success of the quest will depend not only upon warriors and kings, but also upon the steadfast hearts of ordinary individuals. Throughout the journey south, Pippin's inexperience occasionally leads them into difficulty. The best-known example occurs within the abandoned dwarf kingdom of Moria. While exploring one of its great halls, he accidentally drops a stone into an ancient well, sending echoes deep into the darkness below. Gandalf gently rebukes him, calling him a fool of a tooth, a phrase that has become one of the most memorable lines associated with the character. Although the incident provides a brief moment of humor, it also illustrates an important aspect of Pippin's early personality. He's curious and energetic, but he has not yet learned to measure every action against the dangers surrounding him. The trials of Moria soon become far more serious than any youthful mistake. The Fellowship is pursued through the mines, and Gandalf falls while defending his companions from the Balrog upon the bridge of Khazad-dûm. For Pippin, this marks one of the first truly devastating moments of the journey. The wizard, who had long been a familiar visitor of the Shire, bringing fireworks and tales of distant lands, is suddenly gone. The loss forces Pippin to confront the reality that this is no simple adventure. Even the wisest and most powerful members of the Fellowship are not beyond danger. The remaining journey through Lothlorien and down the great river Anduin continues under the shadow of that loss. Although Pippin speaks less often than some of the other members of the Fellowship, his quiet determination becomes increasingly evident. He endures hardships that would have seemed unimaginable only weeks earlier, yet he never considers abandoning his companions or returning home. By the end of the Fellowship of the Ring, Pippin has not undergone a dramatic transformation. He remains cheerful, curious, and sometimes impulsive. However, the foundations of a deeper maturity have begun to take shape. The comfortable life he once knew has been replaced by uncertainty, sacrifice, and danger. Rather than diminishing his spirit, these experiences begin to strengthen it. The young hobbit who left the Shire with little understanding of the wider world finishes the first stage of the journey with a growing appreciation of courage, responsibility, and the cost of protecting those he loves. By the beginning of the Two Towers, Peregrin Took finds himself separated from Frodo and Sam for the first time since leaving the Shire. The Fellowship has been broken. Boromir has fallen defending Merry and Pippin, and the two young hobbits have been captured by a company of orcs. The light-hearted journey that began in the rolling hills of the Shire has become a desperate struggle for survival, and Pippin is forced to rely on quick thinking rather than the protection of his older and more experienced companions. Although he is now a prisoner, Pippin demonstrates a growing ability to remain calm under pressure. During the orcs' march across the plains of Rohan, he carefully observes his surroundings, listens to the conversations of his captors, and waits for opportunities to help. One of his most important actions is deceptively simple. Realizing that Aragorn, Legolas, and Gimli will almost certainly follow their trail, Pippin quietly drops the silver brooch from his elven cloak onto the ground. The small token serves as a signpost, confirming that the hunters are traveling in the correct direction. It is a thoughtful and decisive decision made under difficult circumstances, illustrating that Pippin has begun to think beyond the immediate moment. The long march across Rohan also teaches him endurance. Captivity offers little food, almost no rest, and constant uncertainty. Yet, Pippin and Merry support one another throughout the ordeal, refusing to give in to hopelessness. Their friendship, first established during the peaceful days of the Shire, becomes an important source of strength. Tolkien often presents courage not as fearlessness, but as the determination to continue despite fear, and Pippin gradually begins to embody that ideal. Following a battle between the orcs and the riders of Rohan, Merry and Pippin escape into Fangorn Forest, one of the oldest and most mysterious places remaining in Middle-earth. There, they encounter Treebeard, an Ent whose life spans countless centuries. If Pippin represents youthful energy and enthusiasm, Treebeard represents patience measured across ages. Their conversations introduce Pippin to a perspective unlike anything he has previously encountered. The Ents move deliberately, speak thoughtfully, and avoid making hasty decisions. To many younger races, they appear almost impossibly slow, yet their patience reflects wisdom rather than hesitation. Living among them, Pippin is given an opportunity to witness a different kind of strength. He begins to understand that careful judgment can be just as valuable as quick action. Pippin and Merry also play an important role in convincing Treebeard that Saruman's destruction of the forest can no longer be ignored. Although the Ents have long preferred to remain apart from the affairs of other peoples, they eventually gather for what they call the Entmoot, a council in which they carefully debate their course of action. After reaching their decision, the Ents march against Isengard, overwhelming the fortress through the sheer power of nature itself. While Pippin is not the commander of this assault, his presence and testimony help set these events in motion, demonstrating once again that seemingly small individuals can influence the course of much larger events. After Isengard falls, Aragorn, Legolas, and Gimli finally reunite with the two hobbits. The contrast between this meeting and their earlier travels is striking, as Merry and Pippin are no longer simply the youngest members of the Fellowship who required constant protection. Instead, they have survived captivity, escaped overwhelming danger, and witnessed the downfall of one of their enemy's greatest strongholds. And despite everything they have endured, they greet their friends with warmth, humor, and an appreciation for familiar comforts such as food and pipe weed. Their ability to preserve their good spirits becomes one of their greatest strengths. It is also during this time that Pippin's curiosity, a trait that has followed him since the beginning, has once again shaped the story. While resting at Isengard, he secretly takes possession of the Palantir, one of the ancient seeing stones recovered from Saruman's possessions. Unable to resist the temptation to examine such a mysterious object, Pippin looks into the stone during the night. The decision proves immediately dangerous. Through the Palantir, Pippin comes into direct contact with Sauron, who mistakes the young hobbit for a prisoner being held by Saruman. The encounter is terrifying, and Gandalf quickly realizes the risk posed by the stone. Yet, even this mistake produces an unexpected advantage. Because Sauron draws incorrect conclusions from what he sees, his attention is diverted from Frodo's secret journey toward Mordor, and once again, Pippin's actions have consequences far beyond what he intended. During the conclusion of the Twin Towers, Pippin is changed in quiet but meaningful ways. He remains cheerful, curious, and deeply loyal to his friends. Yet these familiar qualities are now stronger and accompanied by a greater resilience and wisdom. The impulsive hobbit who once stumbled into danger through inexperience has begun to develop sound judgment under pressure. His courage no longer comes merely from youthful confidence, but from experience earned through hardship. Although he is still far from the end of his journey, the events of the second book reveal that Pippin is growing into a figure capable of standing alongside the great heroes of Middle-earth, not because he possesses extraordinary strength, but because he continues to act with loyalty, compassion, and hope, even in the darkest of times. At the beginning of The Return of the King, Peregrin Took finds himself traveling in the company of Gandalf toward the great city of Minas Tirith. His encounter with the Palantir at the end of the previous book has convinced Gandalf that Pippin should be kept close, both for his own safety and because the young hobbit has become unexpectedly important in the unfolding war. For the first time since leaving the Shire, Pippin enters one of the great capitals of men, a city whose history stretches back thousands of years. Minas Tirith is unlike anything Pippin has ever known, rising in 7 great levels against the side of Mount Mindulin. The White City stands as the last great stronghold of Gondor. Its towering walls and crowded streets and ancient traditions offer a striking contrast to the quiet villages and green hills of the Shire. Although Pippin is impressed by its grandeur, he also arrives at a time when the city prepares for war. Soldiers gather from distant provinces, supplies are carried through the gates, and every inhabitant understands that Sauron's armies will soon march upon them. One of Pippin's first actions in the city is shaped by gratitude, remembering that Boromir gave his life defending Merry and himself at Amon Hen. Pippin asks to enter the service of Denethor, the steward of Gondor and Boromir's father. The request is not made because anyone expects a hobbit to become an accomplished soldier. Instead, Pippin wishes to repay, in whatever small way he can, the sacrifice that Boromir made on his behalf. Denethor accepts his offer, clothing him in the black and silver livery of the guard of the citadel. Though largely ceremonial, his oath reflects Pippin's growing sense of duty. Earlier in the journey, he had followed his friends out of loyalty. Now, he chooses to accept responsibilities of his own. Life within Minas Tirith also allows Pippin to observe Denethor more closely than many others can. This steward is an intelligent and capable ruler, but years of struggle against Mordor have left him weary and increasingly despairing. Pippin witnesses this gradual decline firsthand, giving him an understanding of the burdens carried by those who lead kingdoms in times of war. When the armies of Mordor finally surround Minas Tirith, Pippin experiences the largest battle of his life. The siege of Gondor brings together thousands of soldiers from many lands, while great engines of war batter the city's defenses. Although Pippin cannot match the strength or skill of the professional warriors around him, he fulfills the duties entrusted to him, remaining at his post despite the overwhelming scale of the conflict. Perhaps Pippin's most significant contribution during the siege comes not from combat, but through observation and decisive action. He discovers that Denethor, overcome with grief after believing his son Faramir was mortally wounded, intends to burn both himself and Faramir alive upon a funeral pyre. Realizing that reason alone will not change the steward's mind, Pippin runs through the city in search of Gandalf. The decision required both courage and urgency. Rather than assuming that someone else will intervene, Pippin acts immediately. Gandalf arrives in time to rescue Faramir from the flames, preserving the life of the man who will later become the steward of Gondor after the war. It is another example of Pippin influencing events not through physical strength, but through attentiveness and a willingness to act when others hesitate. Following the victory at the Battle of Pelennor Fields, Pippin marches with the host of the West toward the Black Gate of Mordor. The journey is not undertaken with any expectation of military success. Those who participate understand that their force is far too small to defeat Sauron's armies. Instead, their purpose is to distract the Dark Lord's attention from Frodo and Sam, who continue their secret mission within Mordor itself. Pippin chooses to march alongside the kings, captains, and seasoned warriors despite knowing the dangers involved. By this point, the uncertain hobbit, who once relied upon others for guidance, has become someone who accepts difficult responsibilities without complaint. During the Battle of the Morannon, Pippin faces one final test. Amid the confusion of the fighting, he encounters a great troll of Mordor. And rather than retreating, he stands his ground and strikes the creature, helping to bring it down before being knocked unconscious beneath its weight. It is a brief moment within a much larger battle, yet it illustrates how far he has come since leaving the Shire. The young hobbit who had once feared the unknown now confronts one of Mordor's greatest creatures on the battlefield itself. With the destruction of the One Ring and the fall of Sauron, the long war finally comes to an end. Pippin witnesses the crowning of Aragorn as King Elisar, and remains for a time in the restored kingdom before returning home with Merry, Frodo, and Sam. The journey back to the Shire reveals that even their homeland has not escaped the effects of the wider conflict. When the returning hobbits find the Shire under the control of ruffians serving Saruman, Pippin once again takes an active role. No longer the inexperienced traveler who first crossed the borders of the Shire, he helps organize resistance alongside Merry and the other hobbits. During the Battle of Bywater, he fights in the defense of his homeland, contributing to the liberation of the Shire from outside rule. The experience gained throughout his travels now serves the very people he had set out to protect. In the years following the War of the Ring, Pippin continued to serve his people, and with distinction. He eventually became the Thane of the Shire, the hereditary leader of the Took family, and the highest-ranking hobbit official. His close friendship with King Elisar endured throughout his life, reflecting the lasting bond formed between hobbits and men during the war. Later in life, after many peaceful years in the Shire, Pippin traveled once more with Merry to the kingdom of Gondor. There they spent their final years in the company of King Elisar. After Aragorn's death, both hobbits were laid to rest beside him in the House of the Kings, an honor almost beyond imagination for someone who had begun life in a quiet hobbit hole among the green fields of the Shire. Pippin's life traces one of the most complete journeys of personal growth in The Lord of the Rings. He begins as a curious and sometimes impulsive young hobbit with little understanding of the wider world. Through hardship, friendship, and repeated acts of quiet courage, he becomes a trusted companion of kings, a defender of Gondor, and eventually a respected leader among his own people. Yet throughout every stage of that journey, he never loses the warmth, humor, and generosity that first defined him, reminding readers that wisdom does not always replace kindness, but often grows alongside it. The story of Peregrin Took is, in many ways, the story of an ordinary person discovering that ordinary people are capable of extraordinary things. Unlike Aragorn, he was not born to reclaim a kingdom. Unlike Gandalf, he possessed no ancient wisdom or great power. He was simply a young hobbit from the peaceful Shire who chose to stand beside his friends when the world began to change. Over the course of The Lord of the Ring, Pippin traveled farther than he could have ever imagined. He crossed ancient kingdoms, endured captivity, spoke with Ents, served the steward of Gondor, marched beside kings, and witnessed the downfall of Sauron. Along the way, he made mistakes, learned difficult lessons, and gradually grew from an inexperienced traveler into a dependable companion whose courage had been tested many times. One of the defining features of Pippin's character is that he never loses the qualities that made him recognizable from the beginning. He remains curious, quick to laugh, and deeply appreciative of simple comforts. Even after experiencing the hardships of war, he continues to value friendship, shared meals, and the quiet pleasures of home. His maturity does not replace his cheerful nature, but instead gives it greater depth. Following the restoration of peace, Pippin devoted himself to the Shire and eventually became Thane, serving as one of its most respected leaders. The confidence and wisdom he had gained during his travels allowed him to guide his people through a new age while preserving the peaceful traditions that hobbits cherished. Among the many heroes of The Lord of the Rings, Pippin's journey serves as a reminder that courage often develops gradually. It is shaped by experience, strengthened through friendship, and revealed in moments when an ordinary individual chooses to act despite uncertainty. His story is not one of destined greatness, but of steady growth, loyal service, and the quiet influence that even the smallest person can have upon the history of the world. And so the life of Peregrin Took comes to its peaceful conclusion. From the green hills of the Shire to the white city of Gondor, and back again, his journey reflects one of the central themes of Tolkien's legendarium, that wisdom may be found in humble places, that friendship can endure even in the darkest of times, and that the smallest hands are sometimes entrusted with the greatest deeds. This has been Macklin Sleeps. Thank you for listening to our discussion on Peregrin Took. I hope you enjoyed. If you have any suggestions for the future, please leave a comment below, and I look forward to continuing to do this for a long time yet. Thank you.